We are live on YouTube and recording and ready whenever you are for the interpretation announcement.
Great. Thank you so much, Cameron. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this afternoon. Cameron and Guadalupe, can you please make the interpretation announcement?
Sí, Lupita. Ya no se escuchó.
Guadalupe, are you with us?
Sorry, everyone. Technical difficulties. Just give it a minute.
Just talk.
Okay. Buenas tardes. ¿Me escuchan?
Yes,
Sí.
we can hear you.
Okay. Buenas tardes. Los participantes que nos acompañan a través de YouTube pueden escuchar la interpretación en vivo al español de la reunión de este comité de reorganización a través de conferencia telefónica. Por favor, llamen al 508-924-1454. Una vez más, el teléfono es 508-924-1454. Por favor, asegúrese de bajar el volumen en su computadora o dispositivo donde esté observando la reunión. Muchas gracias. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this afternoon. I'd like to welcome you to the June 7th, 2023. Guadalupe, I could still hear you. Sorry. Okay, I think we're good. I'd like to call the June 7th, 2023 District 14 Reorganization Committee meeting to order. Ramona, can you please conduct roll call?
Superintendent Godowski,
Here.
Ms. Goldstein,
Here.
Ms. Anderson,
Here.
Mr. Lucero,
Here.
Mayor Huseman,
Present.
Ms. Van Blaricom, Superintendent Chancho,
Here.
Ms. Boyce,
Here.
Ms. Ramos, Chair Lovato,
Here.
Ms. Molina,
Here.
Ms. Rivas,
Here.
Ms. Kim.
Great, thank you so much. Before we start, everyone should have the little raise hand icon on the bottom of your toolbar. Since we are meeting virtually, hopefully we can use that if you would have any questions or would like to comment, if you don't mind using that, and then we'll try to get everyone's voices heard as we meet. Next on the agenda is 1.03, approval of the May 5th minutes. May I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Thank you.
Second.
Second. Thank you, Ms. Molina. Any discussion? Seeing none, Ramona, roll call, please.
Superintendent Godowski,
Aye.
Ms. Goldstein,
Aye.
Ms. Anderson,
Aye.
Mr. Lucero,
Aye.
Mayor Huseman,
Aye.
Superintendent Chancho,
Aye.
Ms. Boyce,
Aye.
Chair Lovato,
Aye.
Ms. Molina,
Aye.
Ms. Rivas,
Aye.
That's everyone. Thank you. Next, everyone should have received the draft final report. Did everyone receive a copy and has had a chance to review that? Okay. I'd like to open the floor for discussion if you have questions. I think to start, I want to preface this with, I did meet with Dr. Lang, who was the individual that was commissioned to pull together all the information that we've discussed and try to put together a report that captured our thoughts. One thing of note is she did kind of say that while it's labeled a report, we might want to consider it somewhat of a framework, unless this is absolutely where the committee wants to go. If we think this is sufficient and with or without a few tweaks, we want to go ahead and submit it, then I'll leave that up to the committee as well. But I just wanted to start by saying it might not be as detailed of a report that some of us were expecting, or maybe that's just my personal feelings. But I would love to open the floor and if there's questions, comments, areas that you'd like to see changed, or if you think it captures what we were thinking as a committee. And Ms. Goldstein?
Yeah, there's a couple of places in there that are still kind of question mark.
Okay.
They're yellow, they're highlighted. If you go down to page 6, it says finally the cost to bring any variation of reorganization to the voters would be exorbitant. Initial conversations estimate the cost of.
Oh, yes. That was my doing. Good catch. Lori.
There's a couple more too.
Yeah, that one I highlighted because I know we talked about it briefly during a committee meeting, and I didn't know if we wanted to include that in here. But I know individually our districts have connected with the Adams County clerk and got some very preliminary estimates. And I kind of asked that we put that note in there to see if it was something we want to include. Maybe this isn't the place, but I felt it was high enough to be a consideration of this process. Another quick point of note that's highlighted. Let me find it. I apologize. Some of the highlights that are in the section 1 regarding the resolutions that were passed, I think those were highlighted simply to draw attention to them. I guess I would pose to the committee whether or not you also want to elaborate any further on any of those sections, or leave them highlighted, unhighlight them. Dr. Ling did also note, we all know school finance is quite a convoluted thing to explain. And so section 2 was very much pulled word from word from our minutes and from the financial information that we had each brought forth. you'll see that it's primarily Adams 14 information. So if you wanted to include that table that we had created that summed up each of our district information, we can absolutely add that in here. We can absolutely add anything about that, or also ask our financial experts to explain it in a better way. The other part I wanted to highlight was on page 8 at the very top. It wasn't necessarily an ask from the commissioner, but it was an ask of the committee that we talk about the things that Adams 14 was doing. And so I highlighted a section there about the pathways that are rolling out at the high school. Our Adams 14 team has put together a great flyer that we can include. I can send it with you. That was another area that I highlighted to see if we wanted to include addendums. And lastly, there is a section, I can't find it right now, but Ms. Anderson, you had talked about the performance of the schools that are bordering Adams 14 boundaries. And so our team also created a somewhat of a map that displayed those. So I didn't know if we wanted to include that as an addendum as well. But those are the sections I highlighted on the report that are kind of placeholders. By no means need to be included, or Mr. Godowski?
Thank you, Ms. Lovato. So I've been searching around in my email trying to find the report, which is not something that I think I've seen before. I wonder, because I've been sometimes omitted from some calendar invites, if that was the means that by which it was transmitted, if I didn't get a copy.
I'm so
In the
sorry.
event that somebody
Yes.
can just send that my way, that would be awesome.
Ramona, do you mind?
Yes, I will send that to you, Mr. Godowski.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else that has not received that document? Okay. Mr. Lucero.
So I'm still concerned about the larger strategy of the public hearing. If the public hearing has to take place and there's going to be a presentation to those people that are participating in the public hearing, it would be best to have as many of the exhibits as possible. So I would certainly support the inclusion of the financial data, of the chart of all the districts. If we're going to include the academic data, I believe that would be appropriate. And the last thing in the report, there's not a summary to the report. There's a final word. There should be a summary and a very specific recommendation from this committee about how this case would be disposed of, right? The commissioner could choose to take that recommendation or suggestion, or could choose to not take it. But I think we should be, this concludes our work. We recommend that this matter be resolved, or whatever the words are. But I don't believe there's a summary that wraps up the report and our position.
Okay. Mr. Lucero, on what page? This would be page 3. There's a couple of sentences in that red block. Do you think that is sufficient if we were to move it as a summary and maybe add to it a little more? Or
Yeah, I think relocating that makes sense.
Okay.
There are very specific requirements of the law. I think we need to address those and in the summary as best we can.
Okay, thank you. That was one question I had, Ms. Kim. This probably is more directed to you, because when I read the report, I found that it was kind of spread across the requirements or the asks of the committee, what we wanted to include, but then also what was included there was maybe 5 points, well, 7, the points that are included on that second page there, that were summarized when the commissioner sent notification to each district. And then there were the statutory requirements. And so I didn't know if that made a difference on how we address those, or if we had to exactly, sorry, police are going by, if we had to address each specific or all 3 in this report, to Mr. Lucero's point.
I'd love to address that. If I could just ask you to bear with me a little bit. I think
Of
there are
course.
3 primary points that I would like to, excuse me, just make sure that we have procedurally. One, I think the one task of the committee today is to see what portions of this draft it would adopt or revise or whatever as an expression of its position, opinions, the scope of its study, and the like. So I think the discussion on the content of the draft is one thing. We're calling back to committee member Lucero's point that the delegation was for the drafting and all the deciding is for the committee. So I think that's where we are today. In terms of what the effect of this report could be, in my view, it's one of 2 things, which is the statutory process, as you refer to, Madam Chair, which entails a proposed plan of organization, which could be not to organize. But once this committee decides what that recommendation and plan should be, there are very specific timing considerations that flow from that. 15 days, to file it with the commissioner and all of the affected boards, plus 15 days to post a notice and publicize the plan, and then 30 days in which to hold its first hearings. I'm wondering also, though, if as consistent with the draft and whatever the committee decides today, if it just keeps the title essentially and calls this a report to the commissioner and says, here are all the steps that the committee has taken in keeping with all the statutory duties, all the requirements of the order and the statute. I'll just call them one thing because they should mirror each other. And here's what we have to say. And if the conclusion of the committee's discussion today is no reorganization for whatever reasons are accounted in the writing, I wonder if the committee would be amenable to just submitting it with the recommendation, the summary, and say, in lieu of a formal plan of organization that says no organization, no reorganization, and all of the procedural steps that have to follow under the law, if in the interest of economy of resources, timing, and the like, if the commissioner would accept this report in whatever fashion that this committee approves, in lieu of, in place of, instead of the formal process. Those are the 2 main tracks that I see. I'm happy to discuss them both. A lot of them will depend on what this committee decides in terms of the content and the ultimate words used to do this. And those were my 3 points, but I would like to remind the committee too of, Madam Chair, you had pointed out the first thing last meeting that with the commissioner's days drawing to an end of her term, if the timing is still a consideration for this committee's product to be delivered to this commissioner as opposed to the successor commissioner. So just one more factor in there. But in terms of legal process, I don't see any difference between the order itself and the statute. I see those as having to be unified in whatever committee report you do. I would actually give the draft a little bit more credit for the committee's work, because I think it has pretty much addressed each of the factors, maybe not in full, but I would recommend listing them all and cross-referencing them to the statute itself just for clarity. So I'm beginning to ramble on here, but the focus I think today is the input of the committee in relation to this draft, any adoption, any revision, and the like.
Correct. And I agree that I think for me personally, I don't know if the rest of the committee heard, there was a successor named. It still needs to be, the individual still needs to be sworn in or approved by the state board. But to me, that's less of an issue. I think for me, my concern is what the committee has expressed numerous times, is just that we don't recommend putting the time, the resources, all of this to go into a plan. My understanding is there is no feasible way to move forward with the plan. So I personally would appreciate if we could come to consensus on that, and then also the content of the report in lieu of a plan, citing the things you just mentioned, Ms. Kim, economy of resources, timing. Like, we have addressed everything as a committee, and this is our recommendation. I think for me today, I really wanted to get the bulk of the report done, minus some edits. Like, if we can suggest like where we need to improve, where we need to change, elaborate, or where we needed to take a different direction, was my thinking. But I would love to open up the floor. One last comment is, we had a end of year town hall. We had all of our continuations, our commencement ceremonies, and I think for me, my rush on the timeline is simply the impact, the negative impact that this whole looming process and decision has had on our community, our students, and our teachers. Our commencement, our valedictorian speech, which he gave in 2 languages, Spanish and English. He noted he was going to Yale. I mean, a great speech, but for him to equate surviving COVID with the threat of his school district and his school closing, just led to a number of conversations that I don't think need to or should continue in our community. So I'll leave it at that. So do we want to go through each section to kind of highlight areas that we need to update or change, or how would you like to proceed as a committee?
I'm comfortable with that approach.
Okay. For me, the first one was pretty straightforward. Does anybody have any questions about the resolution that was passed? And do you think that the good intro, the timeline and the requirements of the plan were kind of summing up what the committee did and needed to do? And then it leads right into the resolutions and the feelings of each of the districts, boards, and the communities that they represent, as well as the Adams County Commissioners. Ms. Anderson, please go ahead.
Has the State Board of Education already seen these resolutions?
I believe so. I think we, as Adams 14s, submitted all of these, and each of the districts did a number with their constituents, their teachers. Probably over 30 other Colorado districts submitted them to the state board when they were considering this order.
And they were not effective in stopping this reorg committee from happening.
Correct.
So I don't know that leading with something that was already not effective is the best way to start off. I think that the statements in the resolution are very important because it basically is a list of the impacts to your school district. But if I had already been submitted this information before and dismissed it, I don't think I would want to be seeing it again. That's just me putting myself in the shoes of the Board of Education. Which I would, of course, like to say again, I am not an education expert, so other people might have other opinions.
Thank you. I don't see whose hand was up next, Mr. Lucero. I'm gonna go across my
So
screen.
in section 3, the second bullet talks about students in the receiving district being negatively impacted. I think that's a section 1 item. Section 1 says educational needs of pupils in the affected school districts. So that second bullet in section 3 should be in section 1, right? Because I think the section was the educational needs of pupils in the affected school districts. The second bullet specifically speaks to the negative impact of the reorganization on that. So I would relocate that second bullet somehow into that first section.
Okay, the second bullet only.
Second bullet for section 3, right?
Okay. One quick note to Ms. Anderson, I didn't want to dismiss your comment. This per statute goes to the commissioner and the local boards, not the state board. So the commissioner is going to read all of this and then make her recommendation to the state board. Mr. Godowski?
Thank you. I just wanted to point out that I believe our resolution and that of the other districts, Mapleton and 27J, was adopted after the state board order. As I look at the timeline that's presented on page 2 of this draft report, I believe the state board order was May 24th, and all of us took action anywhere from June 1st through the 14th of June. That may or may not change perspective about the value of reciting the resolution and where it goes in the report, but I just did want to clarify that this followed state board action instead of preceded it.
Great point. Thank you. Mayor Huseman?
Thank you. I think that as far as the resolution goes, I'm all for including the resolution. I do take issue with the fact that we just linked to the Adams 12 and Brighton 27J resolution. I think those should be included as well instead of just links to it. If you were trying to drive the impact of the fact that these school boards have voted against the reorganization process, then the full resolution should be included in there, as well as the one that came from Adams County. That just should be it their exhibits or they're actually where they're located there. It needs to be impacting that nobody is in favor of this redistricting taking place, and just putting links out there kind of dumbs that down a little bit, for lack of better words.
I appreciate that comment. I also think it leads to Mr. Lucero's comment about creating addendums and things that we could use to highlight information when we have a hearing or presentation. I'm not quite sure what we're calling it since we're not coming up with a plan and following statute. I'll ask about that later, but we can pick out some of the key elements as an intro and then maybe attach all of them in full as exhibits, for lack of a better word. Ms. Goldstein?
I wonder too, if we want to mention some of the other districts to show how statewide this is something that is concerning not just to us, but to the whole state.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah. What I found in meeting with Dr. Lang and collaborating on this report, how do we as a committee decide where we get that information and how to include it? I don't know if we should, let me share a map. I don't think I have, oh, I do have share screen. We could include the map that I alluded to that showed the performance of the neighboring districts that Ms. Anderson did talk about, but also maybe we do want to address the accountability process as a whole and note, I mean, we could refer to the accountability audit or any information in there that says how many districts are on watch, how many schools are on watch, and our impact on that. I will say in talking to my team, we had to strike a balance because it's the charge of the committee is specific around what happens to Adams 14 versus are we taking on the accountability as a whole, which to me is a whole separate thing that we are still pursuing. But I really tried to keep that in the back of my mind as I reviewed this report. Mr. Lucero?
So I have a kind of a technical question. If we are not submitting a reorganization plan, are hearings required, right? Because if you read what the statute says, it talks about within 15 days of filing the proposed plan, right? So I guess I'd ask legal counsel is, we submit this plan to the commissioner, there's no reorganization, are we still required to have the public hearings?
So Board Member Lucero, Committee Member Lucero, I don't think so. In my view, I think the discussion so far has been showing the scope and depth of the study, which is part of the charge of this committee, to make a careful study of the public school systems with all of the many points of Section 114 in mind. But I think one idea, one, in my view, option is to submit this as a report. And by asking the commissioner to whom you submit this, if she will accept this report in lieu of a formalized plan of reorganization that says no reorganization, if it would therefore satisfy all of the requirements of this committee, and if she would potentially relieve the committee of having to do the rest of it, which is post, publish, have the meetings, and potentially on and on. So in my view, that is still one of the two tracks. The one track is very formalized in law. The second track is up to you in terms of whether to consider as an option. If I can add a footnote here, I do think in terms of depth and scope of the study, the mentions today of appending additional information, I think would be helpful and is a pretty standard way of incorporating information, whether you accept the information in it or not, but just to shorthand instead of summarizing the information, just attach it. So I would put that out there for your consideration as well. I don't know if that answered the question.
Yeah. Mayor Huseman?
So going through section 2, I think it needs significant rework. And I'll start with some of the comments that are made there don't make a very compelling case for why the district needs to stay. You're talking about declining enrollment numbers. You're talking about the negative net position of the organization. Those things put in this report in this manner. If I were having to take action, I would be looking at that and thinking, well, you know, there's serious issues here that need to be addressed that are potentially not being addressed through not reorganizing. So I think that those comments need to be changed in a manner that demonstrates the difficulty of the reorganization, however, doesn't paint the district to be in a negative light as far as the declining enrollment and then the cash position of the district. Second, the section lacks meat and potatoes. You're talking about the mill levy total is significantly lower than its neighboring districts, but we're not putting numbers in there. We're not putting the details in there that are going to have an impact to show that. We're not showing, look, an average homeowner in the southern part of our city is paying X amount in property taxes to the school district. Should it get reabsorbed to another school district, that's going to raise property taxes by X amount, which is going to have a negative impact on those residents, which is also going to probably cause a lot of those residents to automatically vote no. I mean, as we know, it's very difficult to get residents to pay for tax increases. So it just lacks the meat and potatoes to create that compelling argument. It's skimming along at about 30,000 feet. And really, whenever you're talking about dollars and cents, you really need to be at that 5,000 foot level and really hitting impactful numbers that are going to demonstrate why it is that this is not a good idea to reorganize.
I 1000% agree. And I know this was an area we as a district did talk about it, and each district submitted their info. I should say we as a committee talked about it. But I absolutely think we need to pull in some real data, specifically around the Commerce City area that would be impacted. And in a more positive, not positive, but more direct and real comprehensive way. Ms. Goldstein?
Sorry, this comment kind of goes back previous to other people's comments before that, but it does apply, and it's something to keep in mind. This state school board is not the same state school board that enacted this edict. We have two people on there, two new districts on there, or directors, and some have been switched around, so.
Yeah. Ms. Molina?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sí, buenas tardes. Muchas gracias a todos. Thank you so much. I just would like to add, I don't know if we're able to, if there's to add in one of those points about the enviro screen, because CDPHE has Commerce City, our district is part of that viral screen as a disproportionately impacted community. You know, with the air, the water, it does impact, there's multiple health impacts. So I don't know if that's able to be included, because it is part of the state law now that Colorado State recognizes Commerce City as an impacted area, and that impacts the education of our children. And I know because my kids are impacted. So and that is on CDPHE, and it's the enviro screen for CDPHE.
I know our teachers union has spoken about this and the impact, and I think we have data in the district to lead to that. I would open it up to the committee if you think that's something that should be included in this report, as an addendum, as a sentence or a bullet, or if you seek additional information about that. Ms. Rivas, I think your hand was up.
Sí, lo voy a hacer en español, Lupita. Mi comentario o pregunta es que si podemos documentar el impacto que recibiría las familias de Commerce City si el distrito se llegara a reorganizar. Es como un seguimiento a lo que decía el señor Hasman, de buscar las cosas positivas, y no sé si se pueda documentar con las familias o los estudiantes de Adams 14 e incluirlas en este reporte no sé si eso tenga alguna fuerza en el reporte y presentarlo cuando llegue el momento, ¿verdad?
Thank you, Ms. Rivas. For me, I think, and the committee has talked about it, if we do decide that we are submitting this report in lieu of a reorganization plan and we don't have to have an actual hearing. I know I've heard many committee members express their desire to have some sort of a community events where we're sharing this information and obtaining the community feedback. It was also an ask. I mean, we're representing our community, and if there's a stronger way to get their voice in there, I don't know that in the report would be where it would go. Maybe a summary of what we already know, but I would absolutely second your thought about we need to include the impacts. Ms. Molina, I think your hand is up, or is it still up from?
Oh, I forgot to bring the hand down.
Oh, okay. Ms. Anderson?
I agree with Mayor Huesman's statements on section 2, that it needs more meat, more data. I also think in the heading of section 2, there's a sentence that says none of the districts expressed a willingness to do so. That's not really my recollection. My recollection is that all districts stated that they believe that a referendum absolutely will not pass in their district. So even if we do put a ton of work into coming into some sort of developing a reorganization plan, put it out to the public, put it out for a vote, it will never be passed. And I think that's something important to highlight.
So instead of saying the districts, maybe we say the voting members of the neighboring districts would not approve referendum.
Mm-hmm.
I also, I think that's a great point to include in there. I think I think we want to make sure we stay away from presenting text that seems defiant in nature. Like we will not do it, but we're all representatives of our respective districts, and we know how previous referendums have or have not passed. So I think I added a note in my notes to change that.
I think if we include appropriate data, like taxes for Adams 14 people would go up this amount, or if the school districts had to absorb, you know, a $38 million deficit and pay for $170 million of business building improvements, that result to the taxpayers of whatever existing districts would be something. And just to kind of show, yes, here's the dollar amounts, but here's what the impacts would be on the taxpayers within the districts who would then be expected to vote on this referendum. So I agree, not saying that they'll never vote for this, but just saying it's going to cost them this much money.
Yeah, I love that, and I think we also have an opportunity to include what's really happening. I mean, we all receive tax notices on how much our valuations increase. I think there's like Proposition H or whatever they're calling it, all these things happening that are already going to impact communities, but the impact in Commerce City always seems to be really significant. So I put notes in that, and I will, I think as a committee, we need to decide how we get that information. Like perhaps we direct the Adams 14 Chief Financial Officer to obtain this information and kind of beef up this portion in conjunction with the City of Commerce City and probably Adams County, if we're talking tax base and tax valuation and things like that. So procedure wise, Ms. Kim, do we need to be making motions, or can we just note these things in conversation to get that done?
At this point, my suggestion would be to see what additional information you as a committee decide would be needed in
Okay.
reference to which portions, just as you all have been doing, and then see how that tallies up. My other question, I guess, in conjunction with that is, I know that you had asked Dr. Ling, particularly for her expertise in education matters, and if it does include education finance, I don't know if that's something that she can also do, but if the idea is to economize resources and times to bring this report to a final stage, I think taking tally of what additional points of information and which categories they might fall in might influence who you ask in terms of following up.
Okay. And then can I, since most of it again falls on Adams 14, can I sum up our changes and then take that to our district and then bring back the edits to the committee?
I think that's entirely an option. I think it would be consistent with the committee's last delegation of the drafting. But if there's any question, you can certainly put it to your committee members to define the delegation to the drafter, to the obtainers of more information, and in consultation with the chair or something like that.
Thank you. All right. I did have a question around section 3. I had highlighted that last bullet about the Adams 14 strategic plan.
Madam Chair, sorry.
Oh, yes.
Excuse me. Before moving on to another point, it does look like you have another hand up.
Okay. Mr. Lucero, go ahead.
So unless I'm wrong, I think it's impossible for us to forecast what the tax impact may be to anybody without redrawing the lines, right? Because you don't know what the property assessments are for the various possible divisions. It would be easy to calculate if it was all to be absorbed in 27J or all to be absorbed in 12. But there are uncountable numbers of potential tax impacts depending on that's one of the difficulties, right? I think we can make some overarching comment that in all cases, District 14 residents would experience an increase to tax revenues, but it's impossible to calculate that the way I understand the process anyway.
That's very true. Boyce?
Yeah, I think you could paint an example though of kind of the worst case scenario, taking the average household in Adams 14 and the impact if it took on the highest mill levy amount from the district and paint that picture. and say that could have an impact up to this for the average household.
Sorry, I'm typing well. Okay, I put that note. You're right. So maybe even if we consider the high and low end, or maybe we stick with the high end, but just this is an example of what could be the impact.
I think you go with the highest end. You know, I mean, we could list a range, but I think the highest end will make the biggest point.
Okay, makes sense. And sticking with that same section, what about the cost of bringing this to voters? Do we want to include any of that information, or do you guys think we should exclude that? Again, that was something I was just like, well, it was mentioned, and Ms. Goldstein?
Yeah, if you think about an election like this, whenever we've had elections, and you guys have had Mills and Bonds too, there's a lot of money put into getting it passed. Is anybody, I mean, maybe the Charter School Institute might want to put money into it, but you're not going to see a big influx of money you campaigning for this. I mean, it's just, and isn't it about 200,000? I know it's 200,000 for our school district to have an election. And then we also have to have one in Broomfield too.
Yeah.
Madam Chair,
I
if I
would
could,
be for including it. I think that makes that statement more impactful. I mean, I just think, again, this is the first time anybody's doing this, and that's a huge consideration. And we've tried it before. I think Superintendent Gudowski had talked a little bit about how you had ventured into looking into that, and it wasn't feasible, which I think was the point we as a committee were trying to make.
Madam Chair, if I could, I'm not using my raise hand function, I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay.
In the spirit of economizing resources and maximizing the expertise in the room, I'm wondering if to aid the committee members' decision whether to include it, if, like Madam Vice Chair, anybody else has other information about the general range, if it's all in the 6-figure range or lower or higher, just again to give a picture of an approximate number and nail it down as opposed to leaving it open for more information. If the idea is to use resources that have already been gathered, I wonder if a rough estimation would be satisfactory to the committee for the purposes of deciding whether to include in the report.
I think it's a set amount per voter. So we would need the number of voters and the approximate amount per voter and go from there.
It depends if it's a general election or a special election. It's the cost of conducting an election, and it would certainly range collectively well into the 6-figure range. The price gets diminished if it's part of a question with a general election ballot, but an independent election, the county has to conduct the election. It costs money. You got to print the ballots. You got to tally them. But I'm certain it would be, well into the 6 figures between the 4 districts.
I would say close to 7.
Well, and we had looked into it as a district. So the Adams County Clerk and Recorder said that if the districts choose to designate the counties as DEOs and want to run a special election, we estimate that it will cost at least $838,000. This is a bare minimum and can potentially go up due to the voter population increases. If there were possibly 17 entities participating, when you consider again the different cities that build up our different districts, he said for 27J and Adams 12, a combined 188,000. If we were to run this as a special election, it would cost just those two districts combined roughly 705,000. So I don't know if we can enter, like we can enter that information from the clerk and recorder into the report and consider that. I mean, it's probably the closest we'll get to. They know that information.
And that doesn't even do Broomfield.
No, yeah. So would the committee be amenable to me using that information provided by the Adams County Clerk and Recorder into this? Okay.
And that would be a minimum because we'd have to get Weld County in there. You got to get Broomfield County in there. It's all the voters in our district that supersede.
Yeah, yeah. And that's not even including the population increases from the last census, because I think Commerce City was named like in the top 10 growing communities in the nation. So yeah. Okay, I made a note to add that information in here. The next area that I was going to ask the committee that I had highlighted is under section 3. We had put a link to, or I had highlighted to potentially adding a link to the strategic plan of Adams 14. I didn't know if we want to include that because the committee wanted to somehow highlight some of the things that were already happening in Adams 14. We could also include it as an addendum or not include it at all. Mayor Huesman?
I just, whenever you're talking about the cost of the election, I think you need to also include the fact that that would be an unfunded mandate from the state. That's one of the biggest things that we push on whenever the legislature's in session and they want to pass new ordinances and laws and everything, is when you have something that comes down from the state and you're forcing people to spend money. So if they're not going to fund the cost of the election, then it becomes an unfunded mandate against the districts, and that's not what we want to see happen.
Great comment. I'm typing it. Thank you. Ms. Goldstein?
Yeah, if you're sending a hard copy of this, the booklet that you gave out at the state of Adams 14 would be an excellent artifact to send in with the document.
Okay, wonderful. I will add that in here. And do you think in lieu of the whole link to the plan, I think that summed things up and didn't give away too much info? Okay, awesome. Mayor Huesman, did you have your hand up again, or is that? I lost him. Okay, Ms. Boyce.
Yeah, in respect to talking about the work that's being done in the district, do we have any data to back up the improvements that's been made since they started this whole thing going? Like whether it's, I mean, I know there's always CMAS, but maybe it's MAPS data, maybe it's something else that you're testing more frequently that could show that incremental growth.
Oh, absolutely. I think I can ask our superintendent to include that information from our staff. We don't have the CMAS information yet, but we have end of year in comparison to the beginning of year for internal assessments.
Sure, definitely. And, it's totally include if it helps our argument here,
Thank you for that. Yeah.
But I'm sure it does show that. So
yeah, we've had some great strides. All right. Any other sections or bullets anyone would like to address? I took a lot of notes. I think one thing for me that would be helpful in moving this work forward is Ms. Kim made a good point. Like I think we need to decide as a committee, are we pushing forward a report to the commissioner to accept in lieu of going down the rest of the statutory road of submitting any type of plan, having hearings, all of that. Mr. Gudowski?
Yeah, thank you very much. So Ms. Lovato, part of what I was hearing a little bit as I was scrambling around trying to figure out where this report is that everyone was talking about on the front end of the meeting is that there was a reference to a map and maybe some analysis about how schools adjacent to 14 have performed academically and otherwise. Where did that land? Is that something that's going to be added in? I didn't follow along with that part.
Yes. I think I'm trying to find where it is in the report. Anybody please jump in. Ms. Anderson, if you found it.
Is this on page 7, right before subsection 4? Last paragraph of subsection 3. Where you've got exhibit XX highlighted.
No, that was for the flyer that Adams 14 has put together for the academies at the high school.
I didn't see anything regarding data in here. Yesterday, I did run some numbers on my own. I chose a couple schools from each of the school districts and looked at their performance data from 2010 through 2022. There's 3 years of data missing in there. For some reason, there's no 2015 data. And then the 2020 and 2021 data was just copied from 2019, taking all those things into consideration. I looked at some schools that had the same demographics as the schools in Adams 14. I chose title schools that had roughly the same percentage of Hispanic students and roughly the same percentage of students on free lunch to try to take into account both language issues and financial issues. And when I did run that data, I would say the schools, oh, and by the way, the schools that I chose were in Adams 12, Federal Heights, and Thornton Middle School. In 27J, I chose Northeast Elementary and South Elementary. And in Mapleton, I chose Welby and Achieve Academy. And again, I had just my own estimation of what would be comparable. And what I found was that the schools in Adams 12 were basically doing 5 percentage points higher than Adams 14. The schools in Mapleton were doing 7 to 12 percentage points better. And the schools in 27J were doing 7 to 30 percentage points better than those in Adams 14. So that, I don't think that data would support not reorganizing.
Yeah. Thank you. And I think in talking to Dr. Lang as well, like we so appreciate the involvement and support from our neighboring districts. By no means do we want to drag anyone under the bus or highlight anything that we shouldn't be highlighting. So to maybe we just don't include that as part of it, as part of our report. Ms. Molina?
I'm gonna go back and circle back to the Enviro screen. It's a map from CDPHE, because I hear, you know, when you look at the map, you could see how this area is very much environmentally stricken throughout. It's historically marginalized, right? So through the history over and over, and that impacts the education of our children. And we know now, I was at the governor's mansion yesterday. I'm part of an environmental justice roundtable, and this is on the table. Education and how environmental issues impact our education, missing school truancy. In fact, CMAS, during that blowout, during that week, Suncor blew it during CMAS this year. And this is what we have to deal with on a daily. So I really would recommend this committee to highlight the disadvantages that these communities face. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Goldstein?
Thank you. In response to Director Anderson, I think we just need to keep in mind that those data years with the gaps are when we were held harmless because of COVID. So there were a lot of opt-outs that year, people just choosing to opt their children out, at least in Adams 12. I think everywhere it was just kind of the general, why do we need to take this during the pandemic? So the growth data isn't exactly, I question the relevancy of it.
I agree.
Just to clarify, the data that I was looking at was simply the rating scores from the state of Colorado. So I was comparing 10 years of rating scores from each school, coming up with like a trend line for those rating scores, and then comparing those scores to each other. And it's by no means, you know, I would not write this in a scientific journal, but it was enough information for me to see that you would not want to include this information.
Okay. I think to Ms. Molina's point, and I think a few others addressed this as well. I think for the report, I think it would be helpful to include an intro as well as a summary. But in the intro, I think we could address the, you know, where the highest percentage-wise of linguistically gifted students is what we refer to them here in Adams 14 as. We have the environmental factors. I think if we can include that in the intro to paint the picture of current Adams 14 students and all of the impacts to their learning, that's kind of where we could capture that. So I just wanted to say that. So Ms. Molina, I don't want you to think I was dismissing what you're saying. I'm trying to type and comprehend all this at once. Ms. Boyce?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, like, regarding putting data in there about schools' performance, you know, I think no one on this committee would deny that things weren't going well in AMS 14, 10, 13 years ago. And so the point is to show the improvement that's happened, you know, since Dr. Lurie has come on, since your current board has been going and doing this hard work. And that was the data that I think should be picked, and figuring out which data that would be depending on how accurate it is. You know, we all know that, you know, the ratings by the state, so much of it's based on CMAS data, and that's flawed. So especially when you throw the pandemic into it. So whatever data we could pick that would help with that, I think could be really provocative.
Thank you. I agree with that, and the fact that, you know, we do have such a high percentage of linguistically gifted students, and so few of them have the option of taking the test in anything except English. So I think we can hit those points home. Mr. Godowski?
Yeah, just one more thing.
Oh, sorry. Of course.
You know, so many of these kids enter into kindergarten and they're just learning to speak English for the first time and have to take CMAS in 3rd grade. I took 3 years of Spanish in high school and I still wasn't fluent. And I don't think I could have taken the SATs in that, you know, so just food for thought.
I concur. We, my son's best friend often jokes about how his mom just kind of dropped him off to 1st grade. And it was like, good luck, and speak a lick of English. And that's what they're forced to learn. Mr. Godowski?
Yeah, thank you. So on this piece about data, for me, it's always been about infeasibility, the politics and challenges of getting any sort of plan moving forward. I also believe there's challenges in terms of that really solving things. The final point I wanted to make about the comparative data is that I just think we all need to be mindful about the very different resources that each of the districts have. And Mapleton and Adams 12 have had quite a bit more for a good chunk of the last decade than what 27J and 14 have had. And I believe that money makes a difference when it's well invested, and they've had a lot less. And I think there's a lot of things that probably factor into how our students perform on standardized tests each year. But one of the things that I think can matter quite a bit is what you have in terms of money or what you don't have. That can make a big difference in terms of attracting staff, retaining staff, providing interventions and wraparound supports. And so I agree that putting it in the report is not necessary or helpful. I just also wanted to make the point that when we look at 14's performance compared to other districts, I do think money is one of the variables that we have to take into account.
I agree. Okay, I wrote that down. I've resorted to writing because typing and listening is not working out for me. So what I'm hearing from the committee, and please correct me if I'm wrong, we want to adjust the report to reflect more data on Adams 14 and not necessarily all of the neighboring districts around that, with the exception of the financial piece to kind of highlight the vast differences. All right, you guys, we're coming up. Time went by fast. We have about 6 more minutes. Miss Kim, do you have any final words on how we should move forward, other than to update this report and present the next iteration to the committee?
Sure, up to the committee. I mean, my first suggestion is really out of practicality. I think from everything I've heard, drawing this report to final is important to each of you. I think what would make the most productive next draft would be to include everyone's remarks that had some discussion today and had not been vocally opposed, include them in a draft that is provided at least a weekend in advance of the next meeting to get that on the books as soon as practicable so that we can work backwards a little bit. I'd be happy to offer whatever services I can to aid in the revisions. But I think if sort of again, the idea of drawing the discussion points of the committee's meetings today is concrete enough to include as revisions for hopefully a final read next time, then the committee can look at it as a whole, see what it has, see the data that's attached, and then decide what to do from there, with the aim of just not expediting as in a hurry, but to coming to a final written document that is truly a representation of the committee's studies, findings, and recommendation. And then we can work out the technicalities in terms of what to call it and what it triggers in terms of statutory steps and the like. But it would help me a great deal to be able to anticipate some of that, to be a little bit more involved in the revision process with you all, if that's acceptable to you. But I also don't want to slow down the progress or impede the other source of information that have to be channeled here. So the last, I guess trying to answer a question more concretely here, given the last charge of the committee through Adams 14 to find the scribe, I think the real decision points today are to what extent they want to go through the list of items that have been discussed, or to charge the chair to work with the drafter and involve council as needed to bring to the committee a revised draft with the aim of finalizing at the next meeting.
Ms. Kim, can you speak a little more about your being involved with the revisions? Is that to ensure we're hitting all the points required by statute? Or I guess I'm trying to selfishly give myself leeway to get this stuff done and get it back to the committee.
Yeah, only if it's an aid of the process. I've been assigned to be a resource to you all. One of the things in my toolbox is writing. So to the extent that I can get you closer to a final draft, I would love to do that for the committee.
Awesome.
So if it does help, great. If it does not, that's fine also. But we can start circling some things that might need a little bit of adjustment if one thing changes here and changes there. So
perfect. Thank you so much. So do we need to make that an motion? I would propose to the committee, if you're okay with me incorporating your suggested changes, getting the information that's needed, and then working with the Dr. Ling and Ms. Kim as needed, and then get this out to you as soon as I can.
So just to clarify, I do think that this would fall under the category of general committee guidance. I would ask, though, to be a little specific, much like you were last time, to say within 30 days or whatever the case may be. It may be really hard to accomplish, but I think that's going to help the committee keep its momentum. And again, trying to get to the next decision point, which is, what does this writing look like and what is it?
Commitment time. I'm trying to look at our calendar. We are at June 7th. I would say by the end of next week, if that's okay. That would give me 10 days-ish to get the next iteration out to the committee. And then I'll ask Ramona if she can schedule something for that following week. Ms. Goldstein?
Can I request that it be remote again, just in case somebody's not locally in town?
Yes. I concur. I've found that it's just so much more feasible. Minus the technical difficulties. Yes. So we'll meet virtually the week of, sorry, my phone is not cooperating. So I will work with the Adams 14 team and Dr. Lang and Ms. Kim to get the next draft to you, incorporating everything we've discussed here by Friday, June 16th. And then I'll ask Ramona if she can connect with each of you to hopefully get something scheduled for the latter part of the week of the 19th to meet virtually. So then we'll all have time to read it, review it, and come back with the hopes that that's the final. Everybody good with that? All right. Thank you again so much for joining us and for all your work, Mr. Godowski. I'm sorry you didn't get the report. I'll make sure that I check all the email addresses this time. May I have a motion to adjourn, and we'll call it an afternoon.
So moved.
Awesome.
Second.
Good. All those in favor, we all just raise our hands so we can hear thumbs up. Awesome. All right. Thank you all so much. And I'll work hard to get this to you and hope you have a great rest of your week. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.